Phil Mickelson didn't walk away, he was thrown out. And the man who did it stayed silent for years. This is the PGA Tour bombshell they buried in plain sight. Phil Mickelson's former caddy knows the truth, and what he reveals finally explains why Phil really walked away. Except he never chose to leave. Let that land. The most loyal partner Phil ever had turned on him. 25 years gone in one brutal conversation. They haven't spoken since. Something snapped between these two. Something so ugly that Jim Mackay won't say it out loud, even now. One incident froze two families cold, and the caddy still guards that secret like a loaded gun. Then look at Phil today. Elite clubs that once begged for him slam their doors. His friends have scattered. Golf's beloved family man sits alone in 2026. An outcast nobody saw coming. How does a bond this deep rot into pure silence? Subscribe and hit that notification bell before we go further, because nobody drags golf's dirtiest feuds into the light the way we do. Let's follow the money and the grudges straight to the moment it all detonated. The money is where the poison first pooled. Back in 2007, the PGA Tour rolled out the FedEx Cup, a season-long points race dangling enormous bonuses in front of its biggest names. Mickelson leaned on Mackay to help chase that jackpot, the way every elite player leans on the man reading his lies and handing him the right club. In return, Phil made a promise. A cut of whatever those bonuses delivered would flow straight to his caddy, the customary arrangement across professional golf. Then, the checks never arrived. For close to 10 years, that debt quietly festered. Mackay kept a private tally, adding up what he was owed while the seasons blurred past. His number eventually crept toward $900,000. Sit with how strange that is. A man lugging the bag for one of the wealthiest athletes in the sport, present for every roar and every trophy lift, found himself chasing an IOU that simply refused to clear. Money alone rarely ends a marriage, though, and this partnership had long since become exactly that. 25 years bound these two together, stretching back to 1992, when a young Mickelson hired Bones just before the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach. Consider what that bond survived. At the 1999 U.S. Open, Phil vowed to abandon the tournament the instant his pregnant wife Amy went into labor with their first child. Mackay spent that entire week carrying a beeper, primed to yank his player off the course at a single buzz. Their families grew close, and Phil's kids came to treat Bones as one of their own. On the course, the duo scaled the mountain 5 separate times, capturing the 2004 Masters, the 2005 PGA Championship, another green jacket in 2006, a third at Augusta in 2010, and the Open Championship at Moorfield in 2013. Mackay nursed one personal ambition through all of it, a Ryder Cup, and he finally reached it beside Phil at Hazeltine in 2016 during an 11th straight appearance, so the eventual rupture ran on far more than unpaid bonuses. Resentment had been gathering in smaller, quieter ways. Mickelson developed a habit of brushing aside his caddy's reads, overruling the very expertise he was paying for. He also began arriving at the course later than the time he'd instructed Bones to show up, leaving the caddy prepped, waiting, and gradually stripped of respect. Each slight looked trivial on its own. Piled up across years, though, they hardened into something genuinely corrosive. Then there were the flags. Grasping why they mattered requires the tradition behind them. When a player wins on tour, custom hands the flag from the 72nd hole to the caddy, a personal trophy for the man who walked every yard beside him. Mickelson refused to honor that ritual. He claimed the flags for himself, mounting them on a wall built around his late grandfather's memory. One exception earned Bones' complete understanding. Following the 2004 Masters, won just months after that grandfather died, Mickelson framed the flag and presented it to his widowed grandmother. Mackay respected the gesture without a flicker of resentment. But 19 more victories piled up afterward, 4 of them majors, and Bones walked off each 18th green with nothing to keep. Not one flag across a quarter century of service. Picture the dinner parties the Mackays hosted during the Phoenix Open, their home filled with players and caddies, where guests kept innocently, asking where all his flags were. He had none to display. For a caddy, that emptiness cut in a way most outsiders will never fully feel. Everything detonated in the early summer of 2017. At the Memorial Tournament, Mackay finally let it all pour out. He aired every grievance he'd swallowed for years, running from the withheld bonuses to the vanished flags and the daily disregard. In a confrontation that severed the working relationship on the spot, Bones fired Phil. The reverse never happened. Weeks before the public caught a whisper, the caddy had already shown his boss the door. What unfolded next was pure theater. Roughly 3 weeks after that blow-up, 2 press releases landed in the golf world, each one soaked in warmth. Mickelson hailed Bones as one of the most knowledgeable and dedicated caddies alive, insisting the parting wasn't rooted in any single incident. Mackay answered with matching affection, wishing Phil future wins and promising to be first in line to congratulate him. Golf swallowed the fairy tale whole. One longtime tour caddy compared the shock to watching his own parents separate. So why bother with the performance? Both men had motives to protect the lie. Mickelson needed to preserve his face and guard his brand. Mackay wanted a clean departure that kept his future options open, whether in a broadcast booth or on somebody else's bag. The caddy world operates on a quiet code, an unwritten pledge never to reveal what passes between a player and his looper, and Bones honored it faithfully. He refused to spill the details in public, even long afterward. The buried truth only surfaced when biographer Alan Shipnuck pried it loose for his unauthorized book, relying on people close to the fallout rather than Mackay's own account. Once the divorce was final, Phil handed the bag to his younger brother, Tim Mickelson, keeping the role tucked inside the family. He also made a half-hearted attempt to square the debt. During the strained final stretch, he'd already paid Bones $400,000 toward the FedEx money. After the split, a second $400,000 followed. That still left him roughly $100,000 shy of the total Mackay had calculated, and no written contract existed to force the issue. So the caddy was left to simply absorb the shortfall. Phil did overnight a handful of the withheld flags from their marquee wins. Then he scrawled his signature across them in comically enormous letters, which Bones felt disfigured the very keepsakes he'd been denied. Mackay never displayed a single one. Here the tale pivots toward the man who spent years on the wrong end of all this. Bones didn't fade into obscurity. He glided into a comfortable broadcasting career with NBC and Golf Channel, collected a Caddy Hall of Fame induction, had both worn-out knees surgically replaced, and looked thoroughly settled in a low-pressure life beyond the grind. Then, Justin Thomas came calling in late 2021. Thomas happened to be the single player Mackay had always named as the one who could tempt him back onto a bag, and the pull proved impossible to resist. The reward landed in May 2022 at Southern Hills. Thomas began the PGA Championship's final round 7 shots off the lead, a deficit that reeked of defeat. Between rounds, Bones had pulled his player aside for a blunt, steadying talk that Thomas would later credit as the hinge of his entire week. A ferocious charge followed, then a playoff against Will Zalatoris, and finally a second major crown for Thomas. For Mackay, the victory marked his first major since walking away from Mickelson, a vindication laced with the sweetest possible irony. The caddy, cast aside by golf's flag-hoarding icon, now stood grinning in the winner's circle, alongside a champion who genuinely prized him. Their reunion wouldn't run forever since the pair amicably parted before the 2024 Masters, yet the statement had already been carved in stone, all of which throws a harsh spotlight on where Mickelson sits today. The warm family man persona he spent decades polishing has curdled into something colder, reporting through 26 sketches a startling portrait of a man increasingly alone. Exclusive enclaves that once fawned over Phil, places like the Farms, the Bridges, and the Madison Club, no longer welcome his presence. Friendships nurtured over a lifetime have crumbled around him. People who know him describe a frost so severe that his mere arrival could drain the warmth from an entire room. The financial rot that first poisoned the Mackay bond turned out to be a symptom of a deeper sickness. Shipnuck's reporting placed Mickelson's gambling losses near $40 million across a 3-year window from 2011 to 2014, a hemorrhage that helps explain how a $900,000 caddy debt could linger unpaid for a full decade. Phil's name drifted into darker legal waters, too. He once relied on a stockbroker named Gregory Silvera to funnel a $2.75 million payment toward an offshore gambling operation, and Silvera was later convicted of money laundering, though prosecutors never charged Mickelson. In a separate saga tied to gambler Billy Walters, Phil returned more than $1 million the government branded ill-gotten gains from a stock tip, once again dodging any criminal charge. Through every twist, the bridge to Bones stayed scorched to ash. The two men haven't traded a word in years. Whatever finally locked them into this permanent freeze, Mackay still won't put a name to it, shielding that closing chapter with the identical discipline he displayed back in 2017. The silence alone hints at how savagely the wound cut, which delivers us back to the promise stitched into the title. Mickelson's former caddy truly did reveal, through Shipnuck's pages and the mounting weight of these recent years, why the fabled partnership actually collapsed. Phil never once chose to walk away from the man who carried him to 5 majors. He was fired. That glossy tale of a mutual, respectful goodbye amounted to nothing more than scaffolding erected to conceal a decade of broken promises, hoarded trophies, and a caddy who finally hit his breaking point. The exit door, it turns out, swung shut on Phil first, shoved by the one person who understood him better than almost anyone else inside those ropes. A relationship dressed up as brotherhood had been running on buried resentment the whole time, and the instant it shattered, both sides quietly agreed to lie about whose hand pushed it over. If this pulled the curtain back for you, do us a quick favor. Tap that subscribe button, switch on the notification bell, and drop your honest takedown in the comments, because we keep digging into the golf feuds and cover-ups the polished mainstream outlets are far too timid to touch. Share this with the fan who still swears that 2017 farewell was genuine. Stick around for what we uncover next, and we'll meet you in the following breakdown.